Hello, everybody. This is your student aide here. Today, we will be talking about the presidency and the bureaucracy. This is going to be short video, and so I will just try to sum it up. And yeah, let's get started. So the executive privilege, that's just a privilege that's claimed by the president for the executive branch of the United States government of withholding information in the public interest. So this was introduced and shown through the United States versus Nixon case. It was declared that the president did have executive privilege, but those did not meet the criteria for the case, and that the president was not, and to this day, above the law. So that is the United States versus Nixon, which incorporates the executive privilege. So there is appointment power, the authority vested in the president to fill a government office or position. Now, these positions are filled by presidential appointments, which include the executive branch and the federal judiciary, commissioned officers in the armed forces, and members of the independent regulatory commissions. Appropriations is a sum of money or total of assets devoted to a special purpose. An appropriation bill, which is also known as a running bill or a supply bill, is proposed law that authorizes the expenditure of government funds. It is a bill that sets money aside for specific spending. In most democracies, approval of the legislature is necessary for the government to spend money. So here are the four bureaucratic pathologies. That is, there's the rote, the imperialism, turf war, and lack of coordination. I believe I will get into that later on, but if you want to separately go online and search for this, you could. Oversight is Congress's subcommittees collect information about bureaucratic agencies and their performance from agencies themselves, from interest groups, and from constituents. Then they review the budget and personnel issues, investigate complaints, and sometimes hold public hearings when necessary. This is called Congressional oversight. That's something that you may see on the test. Something important to know, that although the executive branch controls the majority of the federal bureaucracy, the legislative and judiciary branches also have some influence. So for Congress, they control the Library of Congress, the Congressional Research Service, and the Government Accountability Office, among other bureaucracies. Through its power of oversight, Congress also monitors the federal bureaucracy to make sure that it acts properly. The courts sometimes get involved in the bureaucracy when issues of law and constitutionality arise, such as when a civil service regulation is violated or if an agency oversteps its jurisdiction. And close that. All right, moving forward, the merit system. So the system by which federal civil service jobs are classified into grades or levels, and appointments are made on the basis of performance on competitive examinations. I'm going to move this up. Civil service is federal employees who work for government through a competitive, not political selection process. So civil service, it's important because they're just pointing out that they look at the merit system to hire. They don't do it just for political selection. Political appointees, that was a highlighted red word that I was really recommend you guys go online and read because it's a pretty tough definition, so I would recommend you go online for that. Patronage is granting favors or giving contracts or making appointments to office in return for political support. The Pendleton Service Act is a United States federal law enacted in 1883, which established that positions within the federal government should be awarded on the basis of merit instead of political affiliation. This is kind of the same thing as that civil service. Just so you guys know, these are all specific definitions and topics that are going to be on, most likely will be on your test. So that's what I'm going over. Administrative discretion, it refers to if a law is too vague, then it is up to the bureaucrats to make it more clear. That's as basic as definition as it possibly is. If there is a law which is too vague, then the bureaucrats have the responsibility to make it more clear for the public. The Hatch Act. This is definitely going to be on your test, guys. It's made illegal for federal service employees to take an active party in political management or political campaigns by serving as party officers, soliciting campaign funds, running for partisan office. That's wrong. Working in a partisan campaign, endorsing partisan candidates, taking voters to the polls, counting ballots, circulating nomination petitions. Oh my God, why are these spelled wrong? Okay. Or being delegates to a party convention. What is the main purpose of the Hatch Act? So it is to ensure that the federal service, the civil service, does not have disproportionate influence in the election of Congress and the president. They do not want someone who really, really leans Democrat to go to supporting their campaign funds for someone who's running Democrat or Republican, and then they want to use that political viewpoint and then have influence in the election of Congress and the president. So that's really the big purpose. So these are just bullet points that federal regulation keeps the federal employees from active participation in certain kinds of politics and protecting them from being fired on partisan ground. This is obviously underneath the Hatch Act. I'll just move that up with that. Federal civil servants couldn't raise money for candidates, promote them, etc. This is kind of the same thing as what I just said. You can pause the video to read through all of it. I'm moving forward. So 4 weaknesses of a bureaucracy. I am telling you guys, your teacher will definitely give you a short answer for this. So I really recommend, for me, I write this down on a piece of paper and keep writing it until it gets in my head. And I'm telling you, that really helps me. But otherwise, just really memorize this. This is really going to help. 4 weaknesses of a bureaucracy. So today's jobs are so complex that they cannot be divided into specialized pieces. Number 2, there are so many leaders at the top of the organization that employees do not know whom to report to. Number 3, rules are almost impossible to enforce within a very large workforce. And 4, duplication and overlap between the units create confusion about who does what. Now, these bullet points, they are talking about the oh my God, I can't write this. Okay, bureaucratic, oh my gosh. Bureaucratic pathologies. If you remember what I was talking about, all the way up there, these are kind of going off of what we're talking about down there, about the 4 weaknesses. There's different words. For example, duplication. There's like 5 or 4 weaknesses that they add in there. Duplication is one of them. See, lack of coordination, turf war, imperialism, and rote. So, or rote is also red tape. That's another term that they use. They almost mean the same thing. So if there's different words, don't worry about that. All right. How does the president check the bureaucracy? Well, he can nominate the leaders, which are the secretaries of the agencies. That's how they check the bureaucracy. Now remember, every agency has a secretary, and every secretary, which heads the agency, is nominated by the president, and he can nominate those leaders. So regardless if they are Democratic or Republican, he can still appoint these leaders, and they are in charge of those agencies. That is a very big impact on the bureaucracy, because they have to deal with these people who are either leaning left or right or even in the middle. So that is a very big check on the bureaucracy. You definitely need to know that. How does the Congress check the bureaucracy? Well, remember, Congress controls the budget. Congress think about the money. They always control the budget. So Congress controls the budgets. So when the bureaucracy, obviously, they have agencies. And in the agencies, they have budgets within the agencies. And Congress can check those budgets of those agencies. That's one of the ways that the Congress can check the bureaucracy. They can also confirm appointments, which is made by the president. That is very basic as it can get. You guys definitely need to know the checks on the bureaucracy or on the president. Now, congressional controls of the federal bureaucracy. There's individual members of Congress allowed to ask agencies, all that is spelled wrong, for detailed information on any issue. That is a little irritating for the bureaucracy, because Congress can come out and be like, well, we want to know everything what's happening in the agency, and they have the right to do that, and the bureaucracy has to submit to that control. Most members use the Government Accountability Office or Congressional Budget Office to conduct studies or investigations of certain programs. Like I said, ties back to Congress asking. Congress and President conduct the oversight. Remember congressional oversight I was talking about above? Congress and President have that oversight on top of the federal bureaucracy. That is a check on the bureaucracy. So, okay, now the explanation and significance of any of these terms. So I did all of these terms. The Executive Office of the President, which is the EOP, it consists of the core White House staff plus several small agencies. And the EOP, is headed by the White House Chief of Staff and assists the President in the implementation and communication of his policies. The EOP is most powerful organization in the federal bureaucracy, and the EOP staffers interpret and communicate the president's wishes to the rest of the government. That is important because the EOP, remember, is the most powerful organization in the federal bureaucracy. So let's go down to the White House. So the White House is headed by the president's chief of staff, can be hired and fired at the discretion of the president, does not need Senate confirmation because that is their own White House office. And the chief of staff right now is General John Kelly. The NSC, which is the National Security Council, the agency in the executive office of the president that advises the president on national security. I think it's very self-explanatory. National security, they help the president and they advise the president on national security. Now, the president can take their advice, or he can just completely disregard it and make his own policy. So it really is just some optional thing for the president. The chief of staff. So the chief of staff is the person who is named to direct the White House office and advise the president. That's as basic as you can get. Ordinance power. So that is an executive power, which is an inherent power. And if you guys don't know these terms, definitely need to look these up because these are definitely going to be on your test. These are like basic ones you need to know. A directive, rule, or regulation issued by the president that has the force of law. I would definitely memorize this. Just stone this in your head, guys. A rule, which is issued by the president that has the force of law. It has the force of law. That is what an executive order is. Also, when the president tells a federal agency to execute a law in a specific way, that's what it is. That's really what it is. An executive order is just a rule issued by the president that has the force of law. It just tells the agency to execute a law in a specific way. Don't get that confused with federal agreement. That's executive order, executive agreement. The executive agreement is a pact between the president and an international country that says county. I'm sorry for all of these typos, guys. And these are unlike treaties. Now, treaties, you need to have a 2/3 Senate approval. But for executive agreements, the president does not require the 2/3 Senate approval. It's way easier, way faster than the treaty. Because when a president wants to make a pact with the international country, he has to wait for a very long time for the 2/3 Senate approval. Sometimes there is an approval, sometimes it takes longer, sometimes there is disapproval. So he just goes ahead, makes an executive agreement, and this does not require it then. That's way easier and faster. Now, the 22nd Amendment. This limits the president to 2 terms. This is just a constitutional power, constitutional written power, which is in the Constitution. I already said Constitution like 3 times. Just for you guys to know, the 22nd Amendment, it limits the president to 2 terms. How I remembered it was it says 2 on there. I just saw that 1 2 and I'm like, okay, 2 terms. Okay. So, the pardon power. It's a release from the punishment for or legal consequences of a crime. A pardon can be granted by the president before or after the conviction. Pardon power, obviously you guys have seen all that with President Trump. He did pardon a couple people. I'm not really into all that new stuff, so I don't know right now, but Yeah, this has been in the news. Veto power. Okay, there's two types of vetoes. There's a line item veto and there's a pocket veto. The line item veto is just the power of an executive to veto individual lines or items within a piece of legislation without vetoing the entire bill. So what happens is the president, he says, well, I like this bill, okay, but there's certain parts of it I don't like. So I want you to remove those certain parts so then I can then pass it as a law. And then it sends it back to wherever it's needed, and then they vote on it to veto that specific part. Then they go back to the president, and then he signs it if he wants to. The pocket veto, this is a little tricky. So it's actually a little manipulative. It's an indirect veto of a legislative bill by the president by retaining the bill unsigned until it is too late for it to be dealt with during the legislative session. This is kind of sneaky. The president is like, well, I don't want to sign it, but I don't want to make it look like I'm not going to sign it. So I'm just going to keep the bill, in my pocket. And then until it's so late that it cannot even be dealt with during the legislative session. Because when it's too late, sometimes they take the veto back to Congress and then they vote for it, but then it's too late, right, to be dealt with. So that's what a pocket veto is. The War Powers Resolution. So that's a law which was passed that requires the president to consult with Congress whenever possible prior to using military force and to withdraw forces after 60 days unless Congress declares war or grants an extension. All right, this is the big picture. You guys definitely need to know this. It got cut off some words, but it says the federal bureaucracy structure. So there's the cabinet department. I'm going to zoom out. Oh my God, that's gigantic. Okay, the federal bureaucracy structure. So there are 4 parts to it. And I would recommend you draw this all out. This is just squished up right now, but you can have this cabinet this way, this part this way, this part this way, and this part this way. So it makes it look like a web diagram. And you just write down these important stuff. So the cabinet departments, the executive agencies, remember, that's part of the bureaucracy that's headed by the secretary, which is appointed by the president and is confirmed by Senate. The department experts in certain areas, and each department has its own budget. Remember, the budget is controlled by Congress. They can always give checks on the bureaucracy due to the budget. Then there's the independent executive agencies. Do not get that confused with independent regulatory agencies. The independent executive agencies is established by Congress, and the independent regulatory agencies, they exist to regulate. That's very self-explanatory in the regulatory word in there. Independent regulatory agencies exist to regulate, and this regulates economic activity or interest in each agency. Independent executive agency, it is a separate status outside of the executive branch. So these agencies, they are given a specific mandate or purpose or function, and it's not to regulate. They do not regulate this. So this is pretty different than this one. The independent regulatory agencies, they operate independent from Congress and the president. And examples for this one is NASA, NASA, and the SSA and CIA. And independent regulatory agencies is the FCC and the EPA, Federal Reserve. Just got to know that, guys. The government corporations, the last one, is government-owned business created by Congress. This is created by Congress. Got to know that, guys. And it serves the public need. It may not be profitable, such as the USPS or Amtrak. So then I get more into detail on the independent regulatory agency. If you guys do want to keep reading, just pause the video. I'm going to head forward. This is what I was talking about in that. So I'm going to go back here, and this is what you guys should just get into a little detail on this. I'm going to move forward now. So the Iron Triangle. You definitely may need to know this because you can just write this like during your essay. Just write this in the corner of your paper. Just make this diagram. It's not that hard. I really focused on the red part of these, and then later on, when I needed to, I memorized the blue part of the triangle. But the iron triangle in definition form, it's often defined as the policy-making coalition or relationship between the bureaucratic agencies, congressional committees, and interest groups. These politically active people who gather around a common goal or issue. Now let's explain the interest group. So there's the Congress, the bureaucracy, interest group. Let's start with the Congress. Congress, it provides funding and political support. The bureaucracy provides low regulations on the interest groups and special favors. And the interest group provides electoral support for the Congress. Okay, so the Office of Management and Budget, which is the OMB, a division of the Executive Office of the President, and they assist the President in preparing the annual budget. Do not get that confused with the NSC, the National Security Council. National Security Council advises the President on national security issues and national security advising. So do not get that confused with NSC. The OMB and NSC are one of the two biggest and most powerful agencies or offices in the executive office. That is the breakdown of the federal budget right now. You can see Social Security is really large. Defense and International Security Assistance is really large. Medicare, Medicaid, and CHIP is the largest one, 21%. If you want to look at that online, you can just type the federal budget breakdown and you will get this picture. Okay, getting into history now. The Gulf of Tonkin Resolution. That was the Congress, which gave the president almost unlimited powers to oppose the communist aggression. So this was a time of that. It was It was that time in history where Congress gave the president almost unlimited power. They were like, take as much power as you want. All we want is to oppose this communist aggression. We do not want any communism in our country. And that's what happened, and the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution happened. I think after that, and I don't know if I've discussed it, but the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, what happened was after this caused really a big uproar, because the president had a lot of powers even after the whole communist aggression ended. And so they created another resolution to stop that and limit their powers, the president's powers. Lame duck is an elected official or group continuing to hold political office during the period between the election and the inauguration of a successor. Treaties. So treaties is a formal agreement between the government of two countries. And remember, this must be approved by 2/3 of the Senate. That is very important because that is different than I forgot the word. Executive agreement, that's what it is. Yes, it's different than the executive agreement. Treaties, it requires 2/3. Executive agreement doesn't. Now, let's move on. Why has the size of the executive office of the president grown so much? So these were specific short answers that I wrote down because these were pretty important. I thought that your teacher may ask you guys this. So I'm going to include this because in times of national crisis, the president powers grows. So that, like I said, the Tonkin Gulf, resolution, right? Gulf of Tonkin resolution, because in times of national crisis, communist aggression, the president powers grows. And that is completely, you can see that in this resolution. And the more laws Congress passes, the more there is to implement, obviously. All right, this is the president's constitutional power. You guys can read over this. I'm going to move forward in the roles of the president. So, roles of the president. They have many, many, many roles. The roles of the president include the commander-in-chief, top diplomat, first legislator, chief bureaucrat, head of state, party leader, chief economist, bully pulpit. There's a couple more, but I think these are the main ones that you guys need to know. I wrote down definitions on for a couple just in case you guys need to know only limited information for a short answer possibly. And so here it is. The commander-in-chief, let's get started with that one, is the role of the president as supreme commander of the military forces of the United States and of the state National Guard units when they are called into federal service. The checks include that they cannot declare war. Remember, Congress can declare war, but president can never declare war. Military budgets can limit the president's power. So if Congress wants to give president a hard time, they can always decrease or increase the budget for the president as the role in commander-in-chief. Top diplomat. So the role of the president in recognizing the foreign governments, making treaties, and effecting executive agreements. First, legislator, chief bureaucrat, head of state. So the head of state is the role of the president as ceremonial head of the government. Then there's a party leader, chief economist, and the bully pulpit. The bully pulpit, you may want to memorize this one, is a public office or position of authority that provides the occupant with an outstanding opportunity to speak out at any issue. So, for example, the president. Because he's the president, it gives him this position of authority. And so President Trump right now, he believes strongly in immigration. So that is his outstanding opportunity to speak out on that issue. And so whether you agree or disagree with his immigration policies or his immigration views, that is a great outstanding opportunity to speak out on that issue because he is president, because he holds that office, and people all are going to watch him and they will agree or disagree with his point of view. The powers of the president. This kind of goes back to the constitutional powers. There's either the constitutional powers, there's the express powers, which is almost the same. These are the same, Expressed and constitutional are the same because they are enumerated powers. They're found in the 3 articles of the Constitution, first 3. And there's implied inherent. If you guys want to read over that, you can. I do get into that again down below, so you can pause the video if you want and read these on your own. This gets into the power of the president, same thing. This is something you guys might want to know. All right, let's get into the presidential paradoxes. So obviously people are a little irritating, including me. We expect a lot from our presidents, such as President Donald Trump. He is a very strong, forceful, very stern type of guy in his politics. But sometimes other people in the country, they want him to be gentle and decent. It's not saying he isn't decent, but they want him to be both gentle and decent and also forceful and decisive. The thing is, nobody can be perfect. Obviously, presidents, they're not always perfect, but we want them to be absolutely perfect. And so these are paradoxes, the biggest ones that we want in our president. We want him to be inspirational, but don't promise more than you can deliver. I get really irritated by these paradoxes because we want so much from the president, and he's only human, or she is only human. Hopefully in the future there's a woman as president. But I mean, they're only human, so these are just paradoxes for the president that we really stress. So such as be unique, but look like us. Be unique, but look like us. That's another one. These are the big 3s that I think that are really big for presidential paradoxes. Now, moving forward, the Constitution commands the president to ensure the faithful execution of both the office of president and of the laws more generally. So this is kind of back to the presidential powers that I already showed you up there. So you can pause the video again and read this if you want, going into the presidential power. Now, these are questions I think that you guys may need to look at. I think that you guys should pause the video and see if this helps, and let me know. So that is the end of my document study guide. I really hope that you learned a lot from this. I hope I was straightforward. I did slur a couple times. I'm sorry. I don't know why. I just haven't, my throat's kind of hurting. So, I don't know. Hopefully I will be much more clear in the next video. Thank you so much for watching and have an awesome day, guys. Thank you.